Alright guys, here we are back. This is Russell, and I have to apologize for that stupid moronic dog. He's probably going to bark the whole video. My neighbors are just so rude. Anyway, today we are going to be replacing the starter and the Jetta. I have not been able to get this cranked yet. I think that because the engine is not turning over fast enough, the starter is definitely getting weak. It's starting to make some weird noises. And the last time that I did this job, I did not film it. So it is a pain in the butt. This is a really, really stupid design because the starter is integral with the motor mount, and trying to get that thing lined up when you take the starter out is a pain. But I'm going to do this because hopefully it will help somebody. So this is probably the third or fourth starter this car's had. Every time I went with the Bosch remanufactured ones, and they don't last but maybe 80 or 100,000 miles, the Vallejo, this is a brand spanking new starter. It's not remanufactured. And also, while I'm under there, I'm going to go ahead and replace the crank sensor. Yes, let's get to it. All right, step one is we want to remove the power from the battery, or to the starter. We're going to disconnect the negative battery terminal. That takes a 10 millimeter. Now I got a garbage truck up and down the street. All right, next we're going to disconnect all the electrical terminals that are attached to this cover and anything that's around it, which will make it easier to get the starter out. So you've got this one here, you've got this one here, which doesn't have anything to do with the starter, but it's kind of in the way. Okay, I'm gonna have to put this on the tripod. All right, so it's these two electrical connectors. This one goes to the where the transmission shift linkage is. This one goes right there, and then underneath there are, I don't know if I'm going to be able to see this. There's another connector right there that you need to disconnect, and then we're going to loosen the power steering bracket line here. All right, a 13 millimeter will remove the nut that is at the power steering bracket, and a 10 millimeter will remove this. All right, next there is an accessory bracket, or a wiring harness bracket. And you take this bolt off and we'll remove that, which is right here. And then we're going to disconnect the power, the main power lead. It's a 13 millimeter bolt. When the nut and washer are off, you can remove the power lead and place it to the side. And don't forget there's a smaller lead. There's two of them. Next, after you've done that, you can take this umbilical cord of wires in the wiring harness and take it out of the bracket or the cover, and just kind of get it to the side. You just want to be able to have everything out of this cover right here. Now when you've got this, you got to be gentle with this, but as you pull this up, you can take the cover and it slides right off, it just slides on. There's a bracket. Looks like a popsicle stick right there. Okay. All right, that is the hardest part of the job. Now comes the most frustrating. There's only a couple bolts that hold this starter in. However, it is integral with the motor mount. Now, I recommend either you use a engine lift or one of those gantries that you can bolt the engine to, or go up underneath and use a forward jack to support the engine when you take both of those starter bolts out. Unfortunately, every time I've ever tried to do that, the engine still shifts, and trying to get this back in by yourself, let's just say it's a challenge. So I'm going to try it. It's going to be frustrating, but hopefully if the engine will not shift down, it'll be all right. All right, I've tied the harness up out of the way so you guys could get a better shot. Behind or underneath this little tab is a 13mm bolt, which you will have to be a contortionist to get out. I can't hold the camera and do this, but anyway, it's a 13mm bolt, and then this bracket right here will slide off, and then we'll have access to our 2 bolts to hold the starter in. Alright, so I got the bracket off, and I want to show you the bolt. It goes all the way through to right there. That is that bolt, the top bolt that holds the starter. So it really doesn't matter if you try to loosen the top or the bottom one. I have a jack under here with a block of wood holding the transmission. Now, this has not worked in the past. In other words, it has not prevented the engine from shifting, because the engine doesn't really drop down. It almost rotates like that, and it's super frustrating to try to get that thing lined back up. This is really a 2-person job. The very first time I ever took the starter out, because it had been on there so long, it didn't shift. The second time is when it did it. And well, there's no good way to go about this. You just got to take it out. So I'm going to go ahead and you know what, I'm just going to put the tripod over here and let you guys watch as I do this. All right. Stupid design, Volkswagen. And it's not when you loosen it, it's the problem. It's when you remove it. Other than that, it's not a very bad job to do. Yeah, do you have pressure on this? You don't want too much pressure at all. It'll drop in the output. And be very careful with this connector. There you go. Shift mechanism. Alright, so I got that loose. I'm going to loosen the one on the bottom. I'm going to take it out. I'm going to loosen it. Starter's ready. Almost ready to go. Now, before it clears, there we go. Alright, this is a first, so let me not sit here and goad over this. Let's get the new starter in there. Just wipe the bolt. It's a very long bolt. It goes in there. Before I put the starter in, I'm just going to verify that it's still okay. It hasn't moved. So just double checking the connectors are right, and they are. So the starter has to come out from the bottom. Just wiping the flange off. All right, so we've got the bracket back on. Everything's looking good. So next, let's go and put up underneath and put the accessory bracket, or the harness bracket back on, and the power steering bolts for the hose. All right, so next I'm going to put the bracket back on here, or it's not a bracket, it's like a little keeper, and there's a slot right here that slides onto the metal tab. All right, so I've got, as I said before, our 3 electrical connectors. I've got our solenoid and our starter power wire, and I reattach the harness brace and the bracket to the power steering line. So everything should be good, and this is how I had the jack positioned. Not much pressure on it, but evidently it was enough. Now, one thing I forgot at the beginning of the video, I told you guys I was going to replace the crank sensor, and I was looking at the crank sensor, and on this car it is, I don't know if the light is going to let me show this, but it's right there. Right there. And in order to remove that, I would have to remove the motor mount, which means taking the starter off. I don't think the crank sensor is bad. It's bad com, it checks out. But anyway, so I will have to have assistance, which means I'll have to take the starter off again, and the motor mount. So anyway, let's crank it over and see if it sounds any different than it did before. If you want to know what kind of nasty sound this was making, you can go back and look at my Jetta plea for help. You can hear the starters just not turning like it is, but it should turn over faster. So I'm gonna grab the key and we'll see what happens.